Hey guys, tonight we are slipping back through the centuries, past the age of steam, past the Renaissance, and into the cool, quiet stone of the 12th century. We're going to live the long, strange, and surprisingly influential life of a woman named Hildegard von Bingen. Imagine a world lit only by firelight and faith, where the barrier between the divine and the everyday is gossamer thin. You'll hear whispers of prophecy, compose music that sounds like it's from another dimension, and even invent a secret language, just for fun. Of course, given that you're a sickly girl born in 1098, your odds of even making it to your 10th birthday are, well, let's just say, you probably wouldn't survive this opening paragraph. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a quiet thrill to see where everyone is listening from, so feel free to post your city or country and the local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you are aware of is the light. Not the gentle, diffuse light of a modern room, but a sharp, singular beam cutting through the gloom of a stone house, illuminating a swirling universe of dust motes. You are small, so very small and perpetually cold. The year is 1098, and you've just been born in a place called Bermersheim, a little speck of a village in what will one day be Germany. Your father is Hildebert, your mother Mechthild. They are minor nobles, which sounds grand, but really just means you have a bit more bread and a slightly less drafty room than the peasants working your family's land. You are their 10th child. In a world without reliable birth control, big families are the norm. But 10 is a special number. It is the number of the tithe. For centuries, good Christian families have given a 10th of their harvest, a 10th of their livestock, a 10th of their earnings to the church. It is a holy obligation. And sometimes, when the 10th is not a bushel of wheat or a fatted calf, but a child, well, the principle remains the same. You, little one, are the tithe, a living, breathing offering to God. From your first days, you are not like the others. Your 9 siblings are a chaotic jumble of noise and muddy feet, but you are a quiet, watchful presence. You are plagued by fevers and aches that leave you limp and pale for weeks on end. Your parents likely tried every folk remedy available, from foul-smelling herbal poultices to prayers whispered over your cradle. They might have even tried wrapping you in a piece of cloth that had touched a holy relic, a common practice for families desperate to save a frail infant. Your survival is a minor miracle in itself, something your parents would have noted with a mixture of relief and pious awe. You are the baby they probably thought was a cosmic return to sender, yet here you are. And then there are the visions. They start before you can even speak. You don't have the words for them, so you just watch. It's not like a dream. You are wide awake. Suddenly, the ordinary world recedes, and you see a blinding brilliance you call the shade of the living light. It doesn't hurt your eyes. Instead, it fills you with a strange warmth, and within this light, shapes and colors swirl into scenes you cannot comprehend. You see a star fall into the sea and become a mountain of glowing embers. You see the intricate, branching patterns of a tree's roots, except they are made of silver and gold. You try to explain it to your nursemaid once, babbling about a bright cloud, but she just pats your head and gives you a piece of dried fruit, assuming it's a child's fantasy. So you learn to keep quiet. It's your secret, a silent, shimmering world that exists only for you. As you grow from a toddler into a girl of 7 or 8, your fate becomes clearer. You hear your parents talking in low voices after you've been put to bed. They speak of Jutta von Sponheim, a pious and well-regarded noblewoman who has chosen to become an anchoress. An anchoress is a woman who, as an act of extreme devotion, is walled up in a small room, an anchorage, attached to a church or monastery, never to leave again. It's the ultimate commitment, a living burial for the glory of God, and Jutta, it has been decided, will be your teacher, your destiny. Historians still argue whether your parents' decision was driven more by genuine piety or the practical need to offload the expense of a sickly, non-marriageable daughter. In the blunt calculus of the 12th century, a daughter who couldn't be married off for a strategic alliance was a financial burden. Giving you to the church was an elegant, holy, and socially acceptable solution. It was the ultimate example of it takes a village, except in this case, the village was a monastery, and they were expected to raise you for life. There's no single dramatic moment where they sit you down for a talk. There are no medieval child psychologists to help you process the news. Instead, it's a slow, creeping understanding. You notice a small wooden chest being packed with a few simple tunics and your only book, a psalter. Your mother spends more time holding you, her hands tracing the shape of your face as if to memorize it. She tells you that you are blessed, that you have been chosen for a special life of prayer, closer to God than anyone else. She frames it as the highest honor, and in her mind, it truly is. For a girl in your time, the options are wife and mother, or a bride of Christ. And for a strange visionary child like you, the second path seems preordained. You don't protest. How could you? This is the only world you know, a world where God's will is as real and solid as the stone walls of your home. You simply nod, your mind already half lost in the silent, shimmering light that only you can see. The day is approaching when you will walk away from this life and be sealed into another. The day arrives on a crisp autumn morning, the Feast of All Saints. You are just 8 years old. The journey to the monastery of Disibodenberg isn't long, but it feels like crossing an ocean. You ride in a small cart, bundled in wool, your parents beside you. Nobody speaks much. What is there to say? You pass villagers who stop and stare, some crossing themselves. They know who you are. The tithe child, the little girl destined for a living tomb. You arrive at the monastery, a sprawling stone complex nestled by the convergence of 2 rivers. It's the largest building you have ever seen, buzzing with the quiet industry of dozens of Benedictine monks. You are led to the monastery church. It's crowded. The local nobility, the monks, the abbot, even the Bishop of Speyer is here for the occasion. It's a major event. You and Yuti, a serene and beautiful woman in her early 20s, are the stars of this very solemn show. You are both dressed in simple robes. The ceremony begins. It is, for all intents and purposes, your funeral. The liturgy is the office of the dead, the same prayers and chants sung over a corpse before it is lowered into the earth. You and Jutta lie down on a draped platform before the altar as the bishop sprinkles you with holy water and dust, intoning the chillingly final words. From dust you are, and to dust you shall return. Then comes the final walk. The crowd follows you and Jutta out of the church to a newly built stone structure attached to the north wall. It is the anchorage. Your home. A 2-room cell, cold and smelling of damp mortar and fresh-cut stone. You step inside. The bishop gives a final blessing. The monks and stonemasons move forward. There is the scrape of a trowel, the wet slap of mortar, the thud of a heavy stone being set in place. They are walling you in. The sliver of daylight shrinks, the faces of your parents blur and vanish, and then darkness. A thick, profound silence falls, broken only by the sound of your own small, quick breaths and Yutta's calm, steady ones. You are an anchoress now, a living anchor, holding the monastery fast to God through constant prayer. There is no welcome basket, no orientation packet, just the stone, the silence, and the woman who is now your entire world. Your new universe is stark and small. The main room is barely large enough for 2 narrow straw beds, a small table, and a wooden chest. The floor is packed earth, cold under your thin leather shoes. There are no windows to the outside world. Instead, there are 2 carefully designed openings. One is a small shuttered slit in the wall that opens into the main church. This is your squint. Through it, you can hear the monks' daily services, receive communion, and feel, almost, a part of the world you've left behind. The second opening is in the other wall, leading to a small anteroom where a servant would leave your daily provisions, coarse bread, water, a thin vegetable stew, and take away your waste. It's designed for minimal contact. A hand passes a bowl through, and that is all. It is the 12th century equivalent of a no-contact delivery service, except the menu never, ever changes. Jutta is the center of this tiny world. She is from the powerful and wealthy Sponheim family, and her choice to be enclosed was a shock to the ruling class. She could have been a duchess. Instead, she chose this. She is your mentor, your mother, your teacher, your jailer, and your only friend, all rolled into one. Her piety is a quiet, unshakable force. She immediately establishes a routine, the Benedictine horarium, the rhythm of work and prayer that will govern every moment of your life. The day is divided into the 8 canonical hours, from matins in the deep dark of the night to compline after the sun has set. Between prayers, Jutta teaches you. This is where your formal education begins. You learn to read and write, not in German, your spoken tongue, but in the universal language of the Church, Latin. Your primary textbook is the Psalter, the book of 150 psalms. You chant them, memorize them, and painstakingly copy them onto scraps of vellum with a quill pen. Jutta is a patient teacher, guiding your small hand, correcting your pronunciation. Historians debate the full extent of the education Jutta provided. Did she, a well-born woman, have access to more than just the Bible and the writings of the Church Fathers? Did you read Virgil or Ovid? Was there any classical learning smuggled into this holy prison? It's unlikely, but not impossible. What is certain is that Jutta instilled in you a deep love for the written word and the rigorous discipline of a scholar. Years pass in this unchanging twilight. You grow from a girl into a young woman. Your body changes, but your world does not. It remains the 2 stone rooms, the scent of wax and incense from the church, the scratch of the quill, the taste of thin soup, and the comforting constant presence of Jutta. But your secret remains. In the crushing monotony and sensory deprivation of the cell, the visions don't stop. They intensify. The living light now floods your consciousness more and more often, showing you symbolic images of cosmic scale, castles on fire, falling stars, the intricate dance of the cosmos. You understand them no better than you did as a child, and you are terrified of them. You see them as a temptation, a demonic trick, or perhaps a symptom of your chronic illness. You confess everything to Jutta, every stray thought, every moment of doubt, but you never, ever mention the light. That secret is yours alone, a terrifying and beautiful world locked inside the stone walls of your skull. The years in the anchorage bleed into one another, each one marked only by the slow turning of the liturgical calendar. You celebrate Easter by smelling a different type of incense wafting through the squint. Christmas is marked by an extra ration of bread, maybe even with a little honey. The outside world is a muffled symphony of sounds, the distant clang of the monastery's forge, the shouts of men during harvest, the rumble of a summer thunderstorm. It's all filtered, abstract. Your reality is the scrape of your spoon in a wooden bowl, the texture of the vellum under your fingertips, the resonant echo of your own voice chanting psalms in the cold air. As you move through your teens and into your 20s, your relationship with Jutta deepens. She is no longer just a teacher, she is your spiritual guide. You learn from her how to navigate the treacherous inner landscape of a contemplative life. She teaches you to be vigilant for the noonday demon, the spiritual sloth and despair that could creep into the soul during the long, repetitive afternoons. She shows you how to find profound meaning in the endless recitation of Scripture, to see each psalm as a new and undiscovered country. One of the more peculiar tidbits of their shared life was their practice of self-flagellation. While it sounds horrifying to us, for deeply pious people of the era, scourging was a common form of penance, a way to physically participate in Christ's suffering and subdue the desires of the flesh. It was a scheduled, ritualized part of their week, another rhythm in a life of rhythms. But while Jutta finds peace in this rigid discipline, you find yourself in a silent turmoil. The visions continue to arrive, unbidden and overwhelming. You are a woman now, literate and deeply versed in theology, and you have a framework for what you are seeing. You know the stories of the prophets, of men like Ezekiel and John of Patmos who received divine revelations. But you are a woman, an uneducated, insignificant woman, or so you believe. In the deeply patriarchal structure of the 12th century church, for a woman to claim direct communication with God was not just audacious, it was dangerous. It smacked of heresy. It could be interpreted as demonic deception. So you fight it. When the light begins to shimmer at the edge of your perception, you pray harder, you chant louder, you focus with all your might on the Latin words in front of you, trying to drown out the spectacular, terrifying beauty that is blooming in your mind. The visions are not just flashes of light anymore. They are complex, allegorical scenes, rich with the symbolic language you feel you understand intuitively, even if you can't articulate it. You see a great mountain, iron-colored, with a figure on top whose brilliance is so dazzling it hurts to look. From this figure, a shower of living sparks, each one a human soul, rains down. You see the structure of the universe not as the simple spheres within spheres model taught by the monks, but as a great cosmic egg, pulsing with life and held in the loving embrace of God. You see the fall of Lucifer not as a simple story, but as a wrenching cosmic tragedy that tears a hole in the fabric of creation. Historians still argue about the nature of these visions. Were they migraines with aura, as the neurologist Oliver Sacks famously suggested? Were they the product of sensory deprivation and a mind saturated with religious imagery? Or were they, as you believed, genuine divine revelations? You tell no one. Not Jutta, not the abbot you confess your minor sins to through a grill. The secret is a heavy stone in your gut. The fear is constant. What if it is the devil tempting you with visions of grandeur? The ultimate spiritual pride, to believe that God would speak directly to you. This fear is a core part of medieval piety. The devil was not a metaphor. He was a real, active presence in the world, and his favorite targets were the devout. He would appear as an angel of light to trick you, whisper sweet heresies in your ear, and lead your soul to damnation. The fact that your visions were beautiful and filled you with a sense of divine love was no guarantee. That could just be a clever disguise. So, you redouble your efforts at humility. You take on the most menial tasks available to you in your tiny world. You scrub the floor with more vigor. You insist on having the thinnest soup, the coarsest bread. You try to make yourself smaller and smaller to become invisible, hoping that if you are insignificant enough, this terrifying, magnificent thing will leave you alone. But it doesn't. The light. The umbra vesni viventis. Lucis, the shade of the living light, as you will later call it, is patient. It waits for you, or it continues to pour its silent, stunning revelations into your mind, a flood of cosmic knowledge that you are desperately trying to hold back with the crumbling dam of your own fear and doubt. For decades, you live this double life, the outwardly obedient, pious, and unremarkable anchoress, and the secret, terrified witness to the searing beauty of creation. The pressure inside you is building, year after year, until sooner or later, something has to break. By the year 1141, you are 42 years old. You have lived in the stone anchorage for 34 of those years. The world has turned, seasons have passed, kings have died, and popes have been elected, all of it a distant hum beyond your walls. Your life is a well-worn path, a circle of prayer and quiet labor. Jutta is growing older, her health more fragile. Other women, inspired by her example, have come to Dissy-Bodenberg to join your small enclosed community. They don't live in your cell, but in adjacent rooms, forming a small convent of anchoresses with Jutta as their abbess and you as her provost, her second in command. You are responsible for their instruction, guiding them in the same way Jutta once guided you. Outwardly, you are a model of monastic stability. Inwardly, the pressure has become unbearable. The visions are no longer occasional interruptions. They are a constant shimmering overlay on reality. The weight of keeping them secret for over 3 decades is crushing you. And then the visions change. They come with a voice. It's not an audible sound, not a vibration in the air, but a clear, commanding voice that speaks directly to your mind. It's the same voice that has explained the symbolic meanings of the images for years, but now it has a new message, a direct command. O fragile human, ashes of ashes and filth of filth, say and write what you see and hear. You are horrified. This is your greatest fear realized. It is one thing to passively witness these things, but to record them, to claim the authority of a prophet. That is a step into terrifying, dangerous territory. You resist. You refuse. You argue with the voice in the silence of your own mind, pleading your inadequacy. You are a woman. You are unlearned. A classic humility topos, a conventional expression of unworthiness that was expected of medieval writers, but in your case, it feels profoundly true. You have no formal training in exegesis, the scholarly interpretation of Scripture. Who are you to write a book of divine revelations? You are certain it will lead to your ruin, to accusations of heresy, to ridicule and condemnation. So you say no. You clamp down on the visions, you refuse the command, you double down on your silence, and then you fall ill. It's not one of your usual bouts of sickness. This is something new and terrifying. You are completely paralyzed. You can't move your limbs. You are confined to your straw bed, utterly helpless. The other nuns tend to you, praying for your recovery, but no remedy works. The monastery's infirmary, a monk with some knowledge of herbal medicine, is baffled. Nothing in his books describes a condition like this. To a modern observer, it sounds like a classic case of psychosomatic illness, a physical manifestation of extreme psychological stress. Your body is screaming the message your mouth refuses to speak, but to you, in 1141, it feels like the hand of God, a divine punishment for your disobedience. You lie there for days, trapped in your own motionless body, the visions still swirling in your mind, the voice still echoing its command. In your desperation, you finally confide in Jutta. After a lifetime of silence, you tell her a little of what you've been experiencing. Perhaps you are cautious at first, testing the waters, but as she listens with deep, compassionate seriousness, the story tumbles out. The light, the images, the voice, the command to write, and your crippling fear. It's a confession that changes everything, but Jutta, old and frail, feels unequal to the magnitude of the problem. This is beyond her. The decision rests with the abbot, the man in charge of the entire monastery. So, you take the terrifying next step. You confess to Abbot Kuno. This is the moment of truth. Kuno could have dismissed you as a hysterical woman. He could have ordered you to perform harsh penance for your prideful delusions. That would have been the standard, expected response. But Kuno does something remarkable. He listens. He is a thoughtful, prudent man, and he knows you. He has been your confessor for years. He knows you as a humble, obedient, and deeply pious woman, not as a rabble-rouser or a heretic. Your profound distress seems genuine. He is intrigued and cautious. He doesn't make a snap judgment. Instead, he sets up a test. He assigns one of his most trusted and scholarly monks, a man named Volmar, to be your secretary and confidant. Volmar is to sit with you, listen to your descriptions of the visions, and help you articulate them. This serves a dual purpose. It gives you the support you desperately need, but it also places a learned, orthodox man as a gatekeeper and witness. He is there to ensure nothing heretical slips through. It's a very clever bit of ecclesiastical management. You agree. It's your last hope. You begin to work with Volmar, a kind, patient man who becomes your lifelong friend and collaborator. You sit in your cell, and with faltering, hesitant words, you begin to describe the shimmering, complex world inside your head. You speak, and Volmar writes, translating your German descriptions into proper, scholarly Latin. And as you finally obey the voice, as you begin to speak what you see and hear, a miracle occurs. The paralysis recedes, sensation returns to your limbs. You can move again. The illness, which had been God's punishment, lifts as soon as you submit to His will. For you, this is the ultimate confirmation. The visions are real. The command is divine. Your life's work, the terrifying, magnificent task you have been avoiding for 40 years, is about to begin. The work begins. It is a slow, painstaking process that will consume the next 10 years of your life. The book will eventually be called Scivias, a contraction of the Latin phrase Scito vias Domini, know the ways of the Lord. The title itself is a bold claim, a promise of divine insight. Every day, you and Volmar fall into a rhythm. You don't write continuously, you wait for the vision to manifest. When the shade of the living light descends, you enter a state of ecstatic trance, your eyes wide open, fully conscious but seeing not the stone walls of your cell, but the cosmic drama unfolding in your mind. You describe what you see, and Volmar, your faithful scribe, sits nearby, quill poised over a wax tablet. Wax tablets were the medieval equivalent of a rough draft notebook. They were small wooden boards covered in a layer of dark beeswax. Using a metal or bone stylus, a scribe could scratch notes into the wax. The other end of the stylus was often flattened, so you could scrape the wax smooth again, erasing your work and reusing the tablet. It was an efficient, erasable medium, perfect for capturing your initial, sometimes jumbled descriptions. Your Latin, though you can read it fluently, is not the polished, sophisticated language of a university-trained scholar. You call it the language of a poor little female form. So you describe the visions in your native German, and Volmar, the scholar, helps you find the right Latin words, the correct theological phrasing, to capture the complex ideas without falling into unintentional heresy. He is not just a secretary, he is your theological filter, your collaborator. Historians debate how much of the final text is your raw vision and how much is Volmar's scholarly shaping. Was he merely a translator, or did he actively co-author the work, nudging your mystical insights into a more orthodox framework? The truth is likely somewhere in between, a deep, symbiotic partnership between the visionary and the scribe. Once a passage is refined on the wax tablet, the real work begins, transferring it to vellum. This is the part of the process that would feel agonizingly slow to us. Vellum, or parchment, was the primary writing surface of the Middle Ages. It was made from the processed skin of an animal, usually a calf, sheep, or goat. A single large manuscript, like Scivia's, would have required the skins of an entire flock of sheep. The process was laborious. The skin was soaked in lime, scraped clean of all hair and flesh, stretched tight on a wooden frame to dry, and then scraped again and again with a curved knife until it was a smooth, thin, cream-colored sheet. Then came the ink. You would have made it yourselves in the monastery. The most common type was iron gall ink. It was made from oak galls, the strange round growths that oak trees produce in response to wasp larvae, which were crushed and mixed with iron sulfate, a mineral called vitriol, and a binder like gum arabic. The result was a purplish-black ink that would permanently bind to the vellum as it oxidized. Every line of Scivia's was written with this painstaking homemade brew. You would sit for hours dictating while Volmar wrote, or perhaps you wrote some of it yourself, your hand guided by the discipline Jutta had taught you so many years before. The text of Scivia's is divided into 3 parts, mirroring the Holy Trinity. It contains 26 visions in total, each one more complex than the last. You describe the fall of the angels, the creation of the world, the structure of the cosmos, the coming of Christ, and the final judgment. The language is dense, poetic, and filled with bizarre, unforgettable imagery. A great tower layered with allegorical figures, a monstrous beast with the feet of a camel and the head of a pig, the synod of the virtues preparing for battle against the vices. This isn't a theological treatise in the traditional sense. It's not a logical, step-by-step argument like the works of your male contemporaries, like Abelard or Bernard of Clairvaux. It's a torrent of symbolic imagery, explained by the voice from heaven. One of the most unique and fringe ideas in Scivia's is your concept of viriditas, or greenness. You use this word to describe the lush, verdant, life-giving power of the Holy Spirit. For you, divinity isn't a dry, abstract concept. It's a vital, juicy green force that makes plants grow, heals the sick, and keeps the universe flourishing. It's a beautiful, uniquely feminine, and deeply ecological vision of God, something that sets your work apart from the more austere theology of your time. As the pages slowly accumulate, Abbot Kuno, still cautious, sends a partial manuscript of Scivia's to the most powerful religious figure in Europe, Pope Eugenius III. He likely did this via Bernard of Clairvaux, the famous abbot who was the Pope's former teacher and most trusted advisor. This was the ultimate gamble. The Pope could have condemned the work in an instant. Instead, at the Synod of Trier in 1147, the Pope reads excerpts from your book aloud to the assembled bishops and cardinals. He is moved and impressed. He gives your work his official papal blessing, granting you the licentia docendi, the license to teach and publish your revelations. It is a stunning, unprecedented validation. The news comes back to your tiny cell in Dizzy-Bodenberg. You, the sickly tithe child, the fearful anchoress, are now an officially sanctioned prophet of the Church. The work of knowing the ways of the Lord could now proceed, not in secret, but in the full, legitimizing light of Rome. While you are immersed in the cosmic visions of Scivias, the small human world of the anchorage continues its quiet rhythm. But that rhythm is about to be broken. In 1136, 5 years before you began writing, your mentor and mother figure, Jutta von Sponheim's, dies. She had been the anchor of your anchor hold, the serene center of your cloistered world for nearly 3 decades. Her death must have been a profound blow, a deep personal grief that echoed in the stone silence of your cell. Jutta was buried within the convent enclosure, a sign of her holiness and her status as its founder. Her tomb quickly became a site of local pilgrimage. People came to pray at her grave, believing her to be a saint, and soon there were reports of miracles. A blind man regained his sight, a lame woman walked again. Whether these were genuine miracles or the powerful effects of faith and expectation is impossible to know, but they cemented Jutta's saintly reputation and brought new prestige to the small women's convent at Dissy-Bodenberg. With Jutta gone, the community of nuns she had gathered needed a new leader, a new magistra or abbess. The choice was obvious and unanimous. They elected you. You, Hildegard, the quiet provost who had lived in the shadow of the charismatic Jutta for so long, were now in charge. This was a promotion you never sought and likely did not want. It was a distraction from the monumental task of recording your visions. Leadership meant responsibilities, managing the other nuns, settling disputes, overseeing the convent's meager finances, and dealing with the male hierarchy of the main monastery. It's easy to imagine you felt completely unprepared. For 30 years, your life had been one of submission and obedience. Now, you were the one who had to make decisions. This shift in roles was crucial for your development. It forced you out of your introspective shell and into a position of authority. You were no longer just a vessel for divine messages. You were a leader of women, responsible for their spiritual and physical well-being. A quirky detail from monastic life at the time is that an abbess would have held a set of keys, not just to the food stores, but also symbolic keys to the convent itself. For the first time, you, who had been locked in, were now the one doing the locking. Your relationship with the male monks of Dissy-Bodenberg, and particularly with Abbot Kuno, began to change. As long as you were just Jutta's quiet companion, you were no trouble. As the secret visionary working on a strange book, you were an interesting, perhaps miraculous project under his control. But now you were an abbess, with your own community to lead, and your community was growing. The fame of Jutta, combined with the slow-leaking news of your own papal-approved visions, was attracting more and more women to Dissy-Bodenberg. Postulants, young women seeking to join the religious life, were arriving from noble families all over the region. Your small cluster of cells was becoming overcrowded. You went from a handful of nuns to a community of around 20, and more were on their way. The anchorage, designed for a few silent recluses, was bursting at the seams. This created a host of practical problems. Where would they sleep? How would you feed them? But it also created a tension with the monks. The women's convent was technically under the authority of the abbot. The dowries and donations that these new, well-born nuns brought with them went directly into the coffers of the men's monastery. The monks controlled your finances, your food, your very existence. You began to realize that as long as you and your nuns remained physically and financially attached to the monks, you would never have true autonomy. You were a sub-department, a spiritual ladies' auxiliary. This dependence likely chafed at you. You were a prophet, validated by the Pope himself, and yet you had to ask the abbot's permission for an extra loaf of bread or a new supply of vellum. It was an untenable situation. Historians still argue about the precise catalyst for the conflict that was about to erupt. Was it a specific financial dispute? A clash of personalities between you and a new, less sympathetic abbot who replaced Kuno? Or was it another one of your visions? According to your own account, the answer came, as it always did, from the living light. You received a new vision and a new divine command. God, you claimed, had instructed you to take your nuns and move. You were to leave the cramped quarters at Dissy-Bodenberg and found a new independent convent on a hill called Rupertsberg, a few miles away near the town of Bingen. This was a radical, audacious plan. You weren't just asking for a new building, you were demanding a secession. You wanted to break away, form your own monastery, control your own finances, and answer to no one but the archbishop. It was a declaration of independence. When you presented this divine command to the monks of Disibodenberg, they were aghast. They refused. Absolutely not. The quiet, obedient visionary was suddenly becoming a very troublesome politician. The battle for your own convent had just begun. The monks' refusal was swift and predictable. From their perspective, your plan was absurd on every level. First, there was the financial angle. Your growing community of nuns, many from wealthy families, was a significant source of income and prestige for Disibodenberg. Their dowries were helping to fund the monks' own building projects and scholarly pursuits. Letting you leave was like letting their most profitable department just walk out the door and set up a competing business down the street. It was, in modern terms, a terrible business decision. Second, there was the issue of control. The patriarchal structure of the church was rigid. A community of women was supposed to be under the guidance and protection of men. The idea of a completely independent convent, run by an abbess with no male superior nearby to keep things in check, was unsettling. It flew in the face of established tradition. They likely argued they were protecting you and your nuns from the dangers of the world, and from yourselves. What did a group of women know about managing property, overseeing construction, or defending themselves? Third, they questioned the divine origins of your command. This is where things got personal. They had supported you when your visions were confined to a book. The book, Scivia's, brought them glory. But now, this new vision was a direct threat to their authority and their finances. It was all too convenient. So they suggested, not so subtly, that perhaps this particular vision was not from God at all. Maybe it was a product of female hysteria, or worse, demonic pride. They were using your own deepest fears against you. The same man, Abbot Kuno, who had once cautiously supported your writing, now led the opposition against your move. You, however, were resolute. You countered their arguments with the unshakable certainty of divine mandate. This wasn't your idea, you insisted. It was God's. To deny you was to deny God. The standoff lasted for months. The atmosphere in the monastery must have been thick with tension. The monks likely tried everything to make you back down. Theological arguments, emotional appeals, threats of ecclesiastical punishment. But you had a trump card they hadn't counted on. Remember the mysterious paralysis that struck you when you refused to write? It came back. Just as the conflict reached its peak, you once again fell gravely ill, struck down by a crippling, paralyzing sickness. You were confined to your bed, unable to move, a living statue of protest. To the monks, this might have looked like a manipulative tactic, a hunger strike of the soul. But to you and your supporters, it was the same pattern as before. God was punishing not you, but the monks, for their disobedience to his will, using your body as the battlefield. This is a classic example of what historians call charismatic authority. You had no formal power, no army, no legal standing to force their hand. Your only weapon was the widespread belief in your holiness. Your paralysis was a form of spiritual warfare. The stalemate was finally broken by a powerful outside force. The Marchioness Richardis von Stadi, the mother of one of your favorite nuns. She was a wealthy and influential aristocrat, and when she saw the monks obstructing a plan blessed by a prophet and her own daughter, she was not pleased. She began to exert pressure. She likely wrote letters, called in favors, and made it clear to the Archbishop of Mainz, the highest ecclesiastical authority in the region, that she supported your cause. An archbishop would listen to a powerful marchioness far more readily than to a squabbling group of monks. The political pressure, combined with the unnerving spectacle of your holy illness, was too much for Disibodenberg to withstand. The archbishop intervened. Permission was granted. The monks capitulated, but not without one last petty act of resistance. They agreed to let you go, but they refused to give you back the dowries that your nuns had brought with them. You would be starting from scratch. They were effectively trying to scuttle your project before it even began, hoping you would fail financially and come crawling back. This detail, recorded in your biography, reveals the depth of the bitterness and animosity that the conflict had created. But you were undeterred. As soon as permission was granted, your paralysis miraculously lifted. You rose from your sickbed, weak, but victorious. You had faced down the male establishment and won. It was a stunning victory. You, a woman with no official power, had bent an entire monastery to your will, through faith, stubbornness, and a well-timed, divinely inspired illness. Around the year 1150, you and about 20 of your nuns packed your few belongings. You left the cramped anchorage at Disibodenberg, the only home you had known for nearly 40 years. You walked out of the place of your enclosure and into the open air, heading for a dilapidated, forgotten hill called Rupertsberg, ready to build your own world. You arrive at Rupertsberg. It is not an encouraging sight. The hill, named after a local saint, was the site of a former chapel, but it had long fallen into ruin. It's an overgrown, neglected piece of land. There are no grand monastic buildings waiting for you, no comfortable cells, no well-stocked kitchen. There is nothing but weeds, crumbling stone, and the wind whistling over the Rhine Valley. You and your 20 nuns are essentially pioneers, starting a new settlement from zero. The first days and weeks must have been incredibly difficult. You were a community of women, mostly from noble backgrounds, accustomed to a sheltered, contemplative life. Now you were faced with the raw physical challenge of survival. You had to find clean water, arrange for food supplies, and live in makeshift shelters while you oversaw the construction of your new home. This period must have been a chaotic jumble of prayer, mud, and hard labor. It's a far cry from the quiet, scholarly life of the anchorage. You probably found yourself worrying less about cosmic theology and more about where the next meal was coming from, or how to keep the rain out of your temporary dormitory. But you were not entirely alone. Your fame, the papal blessing, and the support of powerful patrons like the Marchioness von Stade meant that donations began to trickle, and then pour in. Money arrived to fund the construction. Land was gifted to the new convent to provide it with an income from farming and rents. You, the unworldly visionary, quickly had to become a shrewd administrator, a property manager, and a construction foreman. It's a comical image. A 12th century nun, famous for seeing angels, now arguing with stonemasons about the quality of their mortar. Slowly out of the ruin, a new monastery begins to rise. It is designed according to your vision, both practical and theological. You insisted on features that were radical for the time. Chief among these was a system of piped-in water. This was a remarkable innovation, a luxury of engineering usually reserved for great Roman ruins or the palaces of kings. It meant your nuns had access to clean water for drinking, cooking, and washing, without the back-breaking labor of hauling buckets from a well or a river. This one feature speaks volumes about your priorities. You were concerned not just with the souls of your nuns, but with their health and well-being. Historians still marvel at the technical sophistication of this system and wonder how you, a woman with no engineering background, managed to get it built. The daily routine you established at Rupertsberg was based on the Benedictine rule, the same as at Disibodenberg, but with your own unique imprint. The day was still structured around the 8 services of prayer, the Opus Dei or work of God, but you infused it with your own spirit. Life at Rupertsberg was likely more intellectually and artistically vibrant than in other convents. You encouraged your nuns to be not just pious, but also literate, creative, and engaged with the world in a way you had been denied for so long. Let's imagine a typical day. It begins long before dawn, with the bells for matins. You and your nuns gather in the newly built chapel, their voices filling the cold, dark space with a Gregorian chant. After a short rest, you reassemble for lauds as the sun rises. The morning is then filled with a mix of work and study, what Benedict called labora and lectio. Some nuns would be in the scriptorium, copying manuscripts. Others would work in the herb garden, tending the plants that you would use for your medical remedies. Still others would be weaving cloth or doing the endless domestic work, baking, cleaning, mending, required to keep a community of dozens of women running. One of the most debated and quirky aspects of your leadership was your attitude toward dress. On major feast days, you insisted that your nuns wear their hair down, adorned with white veils and even golden crowns, dressing as celestial brides of Christ. This was highly unconventional. Monastic life was supposed to be about radical humility and the rejection of worldly vanity. The monks at a nearby monastery were scandalized and wrote you a letter of complaint. Your response was pure Hildegard. You wrote back, arguing that it is the devil who prefers filth, drabness, and despair. Virginity, you argued, is a state of pristine, heavenly beauty, and it is right and proper for your nuns to reflect that celestial nobility in their appearance. You were, in essence, telling the grim, grey-clad men to mind their own business, that your convent was going to be a place of beauty and light, not just sackcloth and ashes. It was a theological justification for a bit of heavenly glamour. Life in your convent wasn't just about escaping the world. It was about building a better, more beautiful, more green version of it, right there on your hill overlooking the Rhine. With the convent at Rupertsberg established and running smoothly, you have more time to dedicate to the other fields of knowledge that the living light is illuminating for you. Your intellectual curiosity, suppressed for decades in the anchorage, now blossoms. You turn your sharp, observant eye from the heavens to the earth, to the world of plants, animals, and the human body. This marks the beginning of your second great life's work, your writings on medicine and natural history. You begin to compile 2 books, which today are known as Physica and Causae et Curae, Causes and Cures. These are not divinely revealed texts like Scivia's. Instead, they are a fascinating blend of traditional folk knowledge, monastic herbalism, classical Greek theories, and your own unique, often eccentric observations. You're acting less as a prophet and more as an encyclopedist and a scientist, albeit a 12th century one. It's important to remember the context here. There were no clinical trials, no peer-reviewed journals. Medicine was a messy combination of prayer, superstition, and practical remedies passed down through generations. Your work is a perfect snapshot of that world. The foundation of your medical theory is humouralism, an ancient Greek concept passed down through Roman and Arab scholars. The idea is that the body is composed of 4 essential fluids, or humours: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm, and blood. Each humour corresponds to an element: earth, fire, water, air, and a quality: cold, dry, cold, wet, hot, wet. A healthy person has these 4 humours in perfect balance. Illness is simply a state of imbalance. Too much phlegm causing a cold, for instance. This was the undisputed medical paradigm for over 1,000 years, the equivalent of our germ theory. You didn't invent it, but you adopted it as your framework. Where you become truly original is in your application of this theory and your concept of viriditas, that green life force of God. You believe that every plant, every animal, and every stone was filled with this divine greenness, and this greenness had specific healing properties that could help rebalance a person's humours. Your book, Physica, is a massive catalogue of these properties. It's like a medieval farmer's almanac and PDR all in one. You go through hundreds of plants, trees, animals, and minerals, describing their nature and medicinal uses. Some of your advice is surprisingly sound. You recommend willow bark, a natural source of salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, for fevers and pain. You prescribe licorice for coughs and digestive issues, which is still used in herbal remedies today. You understood the importance of a balanced diet and clean water thanks to your fancy new plumbing system. You also correctly identified that eating raw or improperly cooked pork could lead to illness, a practical observation that predates the discovery of trichinosis by centuries. But much of your advice would seem utterly bizarre to us. You believed that a person suffering from nightmares should sleep with a sapphire under their tongue. To cure a headache, you suggested binding a live vulture to the patient's head until the vulture died, its life force supposedly drawing out the sickness. This is a classic example of sympathetic magic, the belief that an object can transfer its properties to another. A strong vulture could transfer its strength, and so on. One of the most fringe and fascinating areas of your medical writing is your work on gemology. You created an entire system of healing with stones, a practice that feels strikingly modern in a New Age sort of way. You believed that gems were formed from the sweat of the earth, imbued with powerful celestial energies. An emerald, for instance, was born at sunrise and held the full power of the sun and the air. You recommended placing one on your heart to cure pain or simply holding it in your hand to absorb its viriditas. Historians debate where you got these ideas. Was it from lapidaries, medieval texts that described the properties of stones? Or was it from local folk traditions and superstitions that you simply wrote down? Whatever the source, you codified it into a complex system of healing. Your convent at Rupertsberg effectively became a holistic health spa for the 12th century elite. Noble women would come not just for spiritual guidance, but also for physical healing, seeking out the famous abbess for a diagnosis and a personalized prescription of herbs, dietary changes, and perhaps a healing gemstone to wear. You would examine their urine, a standard diagnostic tool of the time, observe their complexion, and prescribe a cure based on your humoral and green theories. You were running a world-renowned clinic, all while also serving as a prophet, a composer, an author, and the CEO of a thriving monastic enterprise. As Rupertsberg thrives, your creative energy, fueled by viriditas, flows into yet another channel: music. This isn't a sudden hobby. Music was an integral part of your daily life. 8 times a day, the chapel filled with the sound of chanted prayer. The psalms and hymns of the Gregorian tradition were the air you breathed. But the music you began to compose was something entirely different. Just as your visions were unlike anyone else's, the music that came to you was otherworldly, breaking many of the established rules of sacred composition. You claimed, as with your writings, that the music and lyrics came to you from the living light. You weren't writing it in the modern sense. You were transcribing a heavenly symphony. This was, again, a shrewd positioning. It deflected any accusations of pride or innovation. How could anyone criticize a melody that came directly from God's celestial orchestra? This claim allowed you, a woman in a field utterly dominated by men, to compose with a freedom that your male contemporaries would never have dared. Your compositions are stunningly original. While most Gregorian chant of the period is modest in its melodic range, often spanning just a few notes, your melodies soar. They feature dramatic, leaping intervals and an expansive range that could stretch over 2 octaves. They are highly melismatic, meaning that a single syllable of text can be stretched out over dozens of cascading, intricate notes. Listening to your music feels less like a solemn prayer and more like an ecstatic, emotional outpouring. It's music designed to evoke a state of spiritual rapture, to give the listener a little taste of the overwhelming beauty you experienced in your visions. You compiled your musical works into a collection called the Symphonia Harmonia Celestium Revelationum, or Symphony of the Harmony of Heavenly Revelations. It contains over 77 distinct liturgical songs, antiphons, responsories, hymns, and sequences, all intended for use in the services at your convent. The lyrics, which you also wrote, are intensely poetic and filled with your signature imagery: green branches, sparkling gems, and the feminine aspects of the divine. You wrote hymns to the Virgin Mary, to the Holy Spirit, which you often described using feminine terms like sapientia or wisdom, and to lesser-known saints like Saint Ursula, whose legend you were particularly fond of. A quirky, almost nerdy aspect of your musical world is that it's a fully integrated part of your theological vision. The music wasn't just pretty, it was a weapon. You believed that before the fall of man, Adam's voice had a perfect angelic resonance, and that all of creation was in perfect harmony. Sin, you taught, introduced discord and silenced humanity's true voice. Therefore, sacred music was a way to reclaim a piece of that lost paradise, to repair the harmony between God and humanity. The devil, you wrote, is terrified of music because it reminds him of the celestial harmony he can never again be a part of. For you, singing was an act of spiritual warfare. Your musical project culminated in your most unique and ambitious work, the Ordo Virtutum, or Order of the Virtues. Composed around 1151, it is arguably the earliest surviving morality play, a precursor to modern opera. It's a liturgical drama, a sung play depicting a battle for a human soul, anima, between 17 personified virtues like humility, chastity, and mercy, and the devil. The structure is simple but powerful. Each virtue sings a beautiful, soaring melody describing her nature and her role in helping the soul. Anima, the main character, has her own plaintive songs. The only character who does not sing is the devil. He only shouts, grunts, and barks his lines. This was a brilliant theological statement. In your world, the devil is pure discord. He is incapable of creating or participating in divine harmony. He can only disrupt it. Historians still debate how the Ordo Virtutum was staged. Did your nuns wear costumes representing the different virtues? Did they process through the church? We don't know for sure, but it's tantalizing to imagine this full-scale musical production being performed by and for the nuns of Rupertsberg, a secret, sacred opera in your own private chapel. The Ordo Virtutum is the ultimate expression of your unified vision. It combines your theology, your poetry, and your otherworldly music into a single, powerful drama. It's a complete work of art that encapsulates everything you believed about sin, grace, and the beautiful, harmonious struggle for salvation. It was another secret world you built, one made not of stone, but of sound. In the midst of all this activity, running a convent, writing theological tomes, composing symphonies, and practicing medicine, you embark on one of your strangest and most mysterious projects, the invention of a new language. You call it the lingua ignota, which translates simply to the unknown language. It is a secret, private vocabulary, known only to you and perhaps a small trusted circle of your nuns. This wasn't a fully developed language with its own grammar and syntax, like Esperanto or Klingon. It was a glossary, a list of 1,011 nouns with a few adjectives sprinkled in. You created new, exotic-sounding words for everyday objects, theological concepts, and the natural world. For example, the word for God was igons. A human was a homo, but in your language, they were an incals. An eye was an orzkiss, a chapel was a loifel. And a feather quill, the tool of your trade, was a caldemia. The words are sonorous and strange, a mix of what sounds like corrupted Latin and pure inspired invention. Alongside the vocabulary, you also invented a new alphabet, the litterae ignotae, or unknown letters. It consisted of 23 unique characters, which bear a passing resemblance to some forms of medieval script, but are clearly your own creation. It's a beautiful, elegant alphabet, full of graceful curves and strong lines. The purpose of this massive intellectual exercise remains one of the greatest scholarly debates surrounding your life. Why would a busy, middle-aged abbess spend her precious time creating a secret language? One theory is that it was for mystical or sacred purposes. Perhaps you believed this language was, like your music, a remnant of a prelapsarian Adamic tongue, the language spoken in the Garden of Eden before the confusion of tongues at the Tower of Babel. By using these words in prayer or chant, your nuns could be speaking a purer, more direct language to God, one uncorrupted by the sins of the world. It would have been a tool to heighten the sense of holiness and separation from the mundane world, a secret code between your convent and heaven. Another, more pragmatic theory is that it was a simple tool for secrecy. In a world with no guaranteed privacy, a secret vocabulary would allow you and your nuns to discuss internal convent matters without being understood by visiting priests, workmen, or even the local bishop. You could talk about a troublesome novice, or shibas, or the need for more wine, vinix, without anyone being the wiser. It was a simple, effective form of light encryption for internal communications. This makes a lot of sense given your recent battles with the monks of Disi-Bodenberg. You had learned the hard way that not all men of the church had your best interests at heart. A third theory, and perhaps the most charming, is that it was simply a creative, intellectual game. It was a way to bind your community of nuns together, to give them a shared secret and a unique identity. Learning the lingua ignota would have been a fun, challenging exercise, a way to stimulate the mind and foster a sense of belonging. It was an in-joke, a clubhouse password for the women of Rupertsberg. This theory highlights the often overlooked aspect of play and creativity in monastic life. We tend to think of convents as solemn, joyless places, but they were also communities of women who worked, learned, and yes, probably had fun together. One of the most peculiar fringe tidbits about the lingua ignota is how it was recorded. The primary manuscript that survives shows the list of words in 2 columns. The first column contains your invented word, and the second contains its Latin or German equivalent. But intriguingly, the only surviving text that actually uses the lingua ignota in a sentence is a single, short passage. O orschis ecclesia, armis divinis prescincata, et hyacinto ornata, tues calzdemia stignis aigons, et es progenies vigins. This translates to, O eye of the church, Girded with divine arms and adorned with hyacinth, you are the quill of the sting of God, and you are the offspring of the grape. The sentence is cryptic, poetic, and doesn't do much to clarify the language's purpose. It's a beautiful, baffling fragment, a single clue from a lost world. Whatever its ultimate purpose, sacred, secret, or social, the lingua ignota is a testament to the sheer creative power of your mind. You weren't content to just analyze the world, you were driven to create new ones. You built a convent, you composed a heavenly symphony, and when the existing German and Latin felt inadequate, you simply invented a new language to better express the unique spiritual reality you were trying to build on your hill at Rupertsberg. It was another layer of defense, another wall of sound and meaning around the precious, green and vibrant community you had fought so hard to create. By the late 1150s, your reputation has spread far beyond the walls of Rupertsberg. You are no longer just the curious anchoress from Disi-Bodenberg. You are the Sibyl of the Rhine, a prophet whose visions were blessed by the Pope, an influential abbess, a composer, a healer, and a correspondent with the great and powerful. And then, in your early 60s, an old age for the 12th century, you do something almost unthinkable for a woman of your time, let alone a cloistered nun. You go on tour. Between 1158 and 1170, you embark on 4 long preaching tours. You travel by boat along the rivers Main and Rhine and overland to some of the great cathedral cities of the German Empire, Mainz, Cologne, Trier, and others further afield. This was an extraordinary breach of protocol. A nun's place was in the cloister. For an abbess to leave her convent for extended periods to travel and preach publicly was virtually unheard of. It would be like the CEO of a major corporation suddenly deciding to go on a multi-year road trip to give motivational speeches in town squares. Your motivation, as always, came from a divine command. You claimed the living light instructed you to go out into the world and preach against the corruption and laxity you saw in the church. You were particularly concerned with the Cathar heresy, a dualistic faith that was gaining traction in the Rhineland and southern France. The Cathars believed the material world was evil, created by a lesser god, and that the true God was a being of pure spirit. This, to you, was the ultimate blasphemy. Your entire theology was based on the goodness of creation, on the sacred viriditas that infused every plant, stone, and person. The Cathar rejection of the physical world was a rejection of God's green, life-giving power. So you took it upon yourself to be God's champion, to defend the goodness of his creation. Your entourage would have been a sight to behold. You, the elderly but formidable abbess, likely travelling with your friend and secretary Volmar and a few of your trusted nuns. You would arrive at a monastery or a cathedral, and the word would spread like wildfire. Hildegard is here. Crowds would gather. Crowds. You would stand before them, monks, priests, and lay people, and you would preach. These were not gentle, soothing sermons. They were fire and brimstone. You denounced corrupt clergy who bought their offices, priests who lived openly with concubines, and monks who had grown lazy and worldly. You spoke with the absolute authority of a prophet, holding nothing back. A quirky detail that highlights the strangeness of these events is that you often preached in a state of ecstatic trance. Eyewitnesses described you standing before the crowd, your eyes open, but seemingly looking into another world, speaking the words that were being given to you directly from the living light. This wasn't a prepared speech, it was a live transmission from heaven, channeled through a 60-year-old nun. This performance of prophetic authority would have been electrifying and deeply unsettling to your audience, especially the powerful bishops and abbots you were often criticizing to their faces. Historians debate how you were able to get away with this. Why wasn't she silenced? The answer lies in a combination of factors. First, your papal approval from years earlier gave you a shield of legitimacy. Second, your public persona was one of unimpeachable personal holiness and humility. You always framed your critiques as God's words, not your own. Third, you were strategic. You often secured the invitation and protection of the local bishop before you arrived, giving your visit an official sanction. And finally, you were a woman. This, paradoxically, worked in your favor. In the medieval mindset, a prophet was an outsider, someone who stood apart from the corrupt structures of power. As a woman, you were the ultimate outsider, which perversely made your prophetic voice seem more authentic. Your sermons were recorded and circulated, adding to your growing body of work. They are filled with your characteristic visionary language, comparing the corrupt church to a woman dressed in rags, and calling on the clergy to cleanse themselves and return to their true purpose. You weren't just criticizing, you were offering a path to renewal, a return to the greenness of true faith. These tours cemented your status as a major public figure. You were no longer just a writer of books, you were an active, vocal reformer, a moral force in the German church. You had transcended the boundaries of the cloister and the expectations of your gender to an extent that was almost unprecedented. You had left the tiny stone cell of your youth far behind, not just by moving to Rupertsberg, but by taking your message to the entire world, one sermon, one city, one river journey at a time. The quiet girl who was once walled in was now making her voice heard across the empire. As your fame as a preacher and prophet grows, your writing desk at Rupertsberg becomes the hub of a vast communications network. You begin a correspondence that is staggering in its scope and ambition. You exchange letters with popes, emperors, kings, queens, archbishops, and humble priests from all across Christian Europe. More than 400 of these letters survive, a testament to your influence and the respect you commanded. In an age before instant communication, each letter was a major undertaking, a carefully crafted document carried by messenger over hundreds of miles of difficult terrain. Your role in these letters is rarely that of a humble petitioner. You write as a spiritual advisor, a scold, and a confidant to the most powerful people of your time. Your tone is one of absolute, unwavering authority, derived directly from your prophetic gift. You do not mince words. You admonish, you praise, you command, and you prophesy, all in the name of the living light. One of your most famous and fraught correspondences was with Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, the Holy Roman Emperor. He was one of the most powerful and ruthless rulers in Europe, constantly at war with the papacy for control of Italy. At first, your letters to him are respectful, even admiring. You saw in him the potential for a great Christian ruler who could bring order and justice to the empire. But when Barbarossa decided to support a series of anti-popes in defiance of the true pope, Alexander III, you turned on him. In a letter that is breathtaking in its audacity, you channel the voice of God to rebuke the most powerful man in Europe. "O King," you write, "it is very necessary for you to be careful in your actions. I see you in a mystical vision, like a little child or a madman, living an unstable life before God. But you still have time. Hear this. The one who is says, 'I will destroy the obstinacy of this man who resists me. Woe, woe to the malice of the wicked who defy me.'" You are, essentially, threatening the emperor with divine retribution. It's the 12th century equivalent of sending a "you're fired" tweet to God's angriest employee. It's a miracle you didn't end up in a dungeon. Barbarossa, while likely enraged, was also a deeply superstitious man. He did not punish you, perhaps fearing that your threats might actually be real. You also corresponded with multiple popes, including Eugenius III, who had first approved your work, and his successors. You treat them with the respect due to their office, but you are not sycophantic. You offer them advice and, at times, stern warnings, urging them to reform the clergy and fight heresy. In one letter to Pope Anastasius IV, you compare the papacy to a sluggish figure neglecting its duty to cleanse the church. You were an equal opportunity critic, unafraid to speak truth, or what you saw as God's truth, to the very pinnacle of power. It wasn't just men you wrote to. You also exchanged letters with powerful and intelligent women, most notably Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was at different times Queen of France and Queen of England, and one of the most formidable political players of the era. Eleanor wrote to you seeking guidance during a difficult period in her marriage to King Henry II of England. Your reply is comforting, but also contains a veiled political warning. Historians still debate the exact meaning of your cryptic advice to Eleanor, but it shows you operating at the highest levels of European court intrigue, a trusted counselor to queens. A quirky and very human aspect of your correspondence is that not all of it was about grand matters of state and theology. You also received letters from ordinary people seeking help. A young monk writes to you, confessing his terrible doubts and asking for guidance. A woman writes to you, desperate for a cure for her infertility. You answer these letters with the same seriousness and care you give to emperors. You offer practical advice, prayers, and words of profound psychological comfort. You are acting as a long-distance therapist, your wisdom and spiritual authority reaching people you would never meet. This collection of letters paints a picture of a woman who had become a true European celebrity. You were the Dr. Phil, the political pundit, and the spiritual guru of the 12th century, all rolled into one. From your quiet study in a convent on a hill in Germany, you had your finger on the pulse of Christendom. Your quill pen had become one of the most powerful instruments in Europe, dispensing divine wisdom and political warnings in equal measure, shaping events and lives with nothing more than ink, vellum, and the unshakable conviction of your own divine mission. As you enter your final years, approaching the age of 80, you might expect a quiet, peaceful retirement. You've built a thriving convent, written volumes of theology, music, and medicine, and advised the most powerful people in Europe. You've earned a rest. But your life was never destined to be peaceful. One final dramatic conflict awaited you, a battle that would pit your unyielding will against the full authority of the institutional church. It was a fight over a grave. The man in question was a local nobleman of no great historical importance, except for the fact that he was a friend and patron of your convent at Rupertsberg. He had been excommunicated by the church for political reasons, a common tactic in the complex power struggles of the time. However, on his deathbed, he had apparently reconciled with a priest, confessed his sins, and received his last rites, thus, in theory, lifting the excommunication and allowing him to be buried in consecrated ground. He had requested to be buried in the cemetery at your convent, and you, believing him to have died in good standing with God, honoured his wish. This act, however, flew in the face of the official ecclesiastical decree. The prelates of Mainz, the regional church authority, were furious. From their legalistic point of view, the man had died an excommunicate, and you had violated canon law by burying him in your holy cemetery. They saw it as an act of open defiance by the famously stubborn abbess of Rupertsberg. They sent you a stern order: dig up the body and cast it out of the consecrated ground. You refused. Your refusal was not based on legal arguments, but on, as always, a vision. You claimed that the living light had confirmed to you that the man had been reconciled with God, and that to disturb his grave would be a terrible sin. You were placing your personal, divine revelation above the clear written law of the Church. To the authorities in Mainz, this was an intolerable act of insubordination. They responded with the most severe punishment they could inflict short of excommunicating you yourself. They placed your entire convent under an interdict. An interdict was a collective punishment, a spiritual lockdown. It meant that you and your nuns were forbidden from celebrating the sacraments. You could not receive communion. You could not sing the divine office, the cycle of chanted prayer that was the very heart of your monastic life. The music was silenced. For you, a woman who believed that music was a weapon against the devil and a taste of paradise, this was the cruelest possible punishment. The vibrant, harmonious world you had built at Rupertsberg was rendered mute. The silence must have been devastating, a constant oppressive reminder of your conflict with the authorities. Your nuns, who had done nothing wrong, were suffering alongside you. There must have been immense pressure on you to give in. Just dig up the body. It was a simple, pragmatic solution. But for you, it was a matter of divine principle. You would not, could not, obey a human command that contradicted a divine one. So you fought back, not with defiance, but with your pen. You wrote a long, passionate letter to the prelates of Mainz, which has become one of your most famous works. It's a theological tour de force, a beautiful and powerful defense of sacred music. You argue that to silence sacred music is to do the devil's work, to collaborate with the forces of discord and despair. By these means, you wrote, you and your whole authority will be in the greatest danger before God, if you do not, with the greatest speed, retract this decree of interdict. It is both a plea and a threat, a reminder that they too will face a higher judgment. The interdict dragged on for months. It was a battle of wills between an 80-year-old nun and the entrenched male hierarchy. You appealed to an even higher authority, writing to the Archbishop of Cologne to intervene on your behalf. Eventually, whether through political pressure or a genuine reconsideration, the authorities in Mainz relented. they sent a commission to Rupertsberg to re-investigate the circumstances of the nobleman's death. They conveniently found evidence that he had indeed been properly reconciled. The interdict was lifted. The music returned to Rupertsberg. The crisis was over. You had won. It was your final, and perhaps your most personal victory. You had faced down the institutional church one last time and refused to compromise on what your faith and your visions told you was right. You had protected the sanctity of a single grave and, in doing so, defended your own prophetic authority to the very end. The sounds of your celestial symphony could once again fill the chapel, a testament to your stubborn, unwavering faith. The lifting of the interdict is your final public triumph. You are now over 80 years old, a truly ancient age for the 12th century. Your body is frail, weakened by a lifetime of illness and the immense stresses of your work, but your spirit remains as formidable as ever. The last year of your life, 1179, is one of relative peace. The convent at Rupertsberg is secure. Your second, smaller convent, founded at Eibingen across the Rhine to handle the overflow of new nuns, is also thriving. Your great works of theology and music are complete, copied and studied in monasteries across the German lands. Your long, improbable race is nearly run. As autumn approaches, your health begins to fail decisively. You know the end is near. You gather your daughters, your community of nuns around your bedside. There is no fear, no despair. Your entire life has been a preparation for this moment, a journey toward the living light that you have only ever seen in glimpses. Now, you are going to see the source. Your hagiography, the official biography written by the monks Theodoric and Godfrey after your death, describes your final moments in loving, idealized detail. It tells how you gave your final blessing to your nuns, comforting them and assuring them that you would continue to watch over them from heaven. On the evening of September 17th, 1179, as you lay dying, a miracle is said to have occurred. According to the eyewitness accounts of your nuns, two brilliant, luminous arcs of light appeared in the sky, stretching over the roof of the room where you lay. One stretched from north to south, the other from east to west, forming a great glowing cross in the night sky. Within this cross, a smaller reddish circle appeared, shining with a gentle, pulsating light, like a dawn. The sky was so bright that people in the surrounding villages woke up, thinking the sun was rising early. It was a final, spectacular vision, one that you didn't just see, but that you became. A divine sign marking the passing of a prophet from the earthly realm to the heavenly one. You breathed your last in a room filled with celestial light, your life ending as it began, with a vision. Immediately after your death, your nuns began the process of trying to have you officially declared a saint. They meticulously collected the stories of your life, your works, and the miracles that had already begun to be attributed to your intercession. People came to pray at your tomb in Rupertsberg, and stories of miraculous healings began to spread. The process of canonization in the 12th century was less formalized than it is today, but it still required official papal recognition. An initial inquiry was launched, but it stalled due to church politics and procedural complexities. For centuries, you existed in a strange state of limbo. You were venerated as a saint locally, particularly in German dioceses. Your feast day was celebrated. You were referred to as Saint Hildegard, but you were not officially on the universal calendar of the Catholic Church. This is a quirky detail of church history, the phenomenon of saints who are saints by popular acclaim long before they are saints by papal decree. The centuries passed. The Protestant Reformation swept through Germany, and during the tumult of the 30 Years' War in the 17th century, your beloved monastery at Rupertsberg was destroyed by Swedish troops. Your relics, your physical remains, were saved by the nuns and moved across the river to your other convent at Eibingen for safekeeping. That convent, too, was later dissolved, but your relics were preserved and are still kept in the parish church of Eibingen to this day. Your writings and music fell into obscurity for a long time, known only to a few scholars. It wasn't until the late 20th century that a massive revival of interest in your work began. Historians, feminists, theologians, musicians, and even New Age practitioners rediscovered your incredible life and visionary works. Your music was recorded and became a surprise bestseller. your medical writings found a new audience interested in holistic health. You became, 800 years after your death, a cultural icon. Finally, in 2012, the long wait ended. Pope Benedict XVI, himself a German, officially canonized you, confirming your sainthood for the universal church. He then took an even more extraordinary step, declaring you a Doctor of the Church, a prestigious title granted to only a few dozen saints whose writings are considered to have a particularly profound and universal theological significance. You joined the ranks of Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and Catherine of Siena. The sickly tithe child, the terrified anchoress, the troublesome abbess, had finally officially received the highest honor the Church could bestow. It took over 800 years, but the world had finally caught up with what your nuns knew all along. And so our story comes to a gentle close. The light from the sky over your room fades, the last notes of your symphony drift away into the quiet of the German night. You are at peace now, your long, arduous and brilliant life complete. You have slipped into the arms of the Igons, the god whose green living light you saw and shared with a world that was so often shrouded in shades of grey. You can rest now, knowing your work, your words and your music will endure, waiting patiently through the centuries to be discovered anew, ready to bring their strange and wonderful harmony to future generations of souls, dreaming of a greener, more vibrant world. Word count 16104. The world you knew is now just a whisper, a collection of stories written on old parchment. The stone walls of Rupertsberg have long since crumbled to dust, mingling with the soil you so revered. But the echoes of your life remain. The echo of a voice raised in song in a candlelit chapel. The echo of a quill scratching across vellum, capturing visions too vast for the mind to hold. The echo of a woman who refused to be small, who refused to be silent, who built her own world of light and sound against the encroaching darkness. As you drift now, let these echoes become a gentle rhythm for your sleep. Let the image of the greening power of viriditas soothe your mind, a vision of life, renewal, and endless quiet growth. Imagine the soft, cool weight of a healing sapphire, the scent of lavender from a convent garden, the low hum of chanted prayer, weaving a blanket of sound to keep you safe and warm. There are no more battles to fight, no more emperors to admonish, no more books to write. The great work is finished. There is only the deep, profound peace of the living light, a gentle and unending luminescence that cradles you as you drift further and further away from the waking world. Let the silence that was once a punishment now become a comfort, a deep and welcoming quiet that holds you in its embrace. Let go of the day, let go of the story. There is only the soft breathing, the gentle darkness, and the promise of a peaceful rest.